Okay, welcome to episode 2 of the Daily Edge. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the first episode. Today we're back to talk a little bit more about fitness, but we're going to kind of focus on the kid realm. Between the three of us, we have 10 kids, ranging in ages from 15 to...
4.
Okay, so we got a lot of stuff going on in athletics and fitness from a kid point of view, but we'll probably get into just parenting in general. Again, we're very similar to probably a lot of you out there. We all have jobs and we're all married and we all have several kids doing several things. So let's kick it off by kind of going through maybe each one of us talking about what our kids are into and what some of the things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
Let's start.
No, I'll go ahead and start. So I have 3 kids, ages 6, 9, and 10, and they are into, almost everything. You hear that a lot from people, is diversify what your kids are into young. The youngest is playing basketball and soccer currently, with football on the horizon soon, flag football. My middle has done gymnastics, baseball, and cheer and soccer, I think. And then my oldest plays soccer and she's a runner. So those 3 that's what the 3 of them are doing. And, some of the challenges we face, and I think we can talk a little bit about it later. What I'm seeing is the evaporation is kind of this, aligns with society as a whole, this evaporation of the middle class. I think when we grew up, you had good kids on your team, you have bad kids on your team, you had average kids on your team, and that was this, combination. Now you're playing in a very rec league or a very competitive league, at least where we're at, which is in Hamilton County, Indiana. And so it provides, I think, some unique challenges, I think, which we can get into, but that's one of the things that I'm seeing being difficult is there is no more middle ground. You're either, kind of in or all in.
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch on I've got 3 boys, 4, 8, and 10. My youngest is not into, he's into everything and nothing at the same time. We tried to put him in soccer this past year, and having 2 older brothers, he actually dominated for like the first couple of games and then refused to go back out on the field. So he played about a fourth of a season. We had to pull him out. That was a whole thing. And then an 8-year-old wrestler, and although it depends on the day, which is I'm sure something we'll get into, wrestles and plays soccer. And then my oldest plays basketball and golf. So a lot of different challenges there. I would say for me, one of the most interesting challenges I've dealt with is how to teach your kids commitment. And, when they show a desire to do something and they sign up to do something, how to teach them commitment without, forcing them per se, right? As society might suggest, forcing them to, get out there and do something that maybe they're not passionate about, at least for that particular day or week or month. So that's something that we battle.
It feels like there's so much pressure. A lot of times we find our identity in our kids and maybe their success as a society. As we work through that, and you guys being in a very competitive area, these kids are starting at 3, 4, and 5. They're putting them in, and it kind of feels like, I'd love both of you to kind of touch on this, but it's like, as a parent, there's been times where I've even felt like, are my kids doing enough? Are they going to be good enough? And those feelings creep in from time to time. But where you're at, I know it's a whole nother level. I'd like you to kind of talk about that specialization and what the environment that is kind of been created.
I think this first comment might ruffle some people the wrong way, honestly, but I'm just going to be straightforward. I think that, in our first episode, we talked about our fitness journeys. And I think the fact that we are working at a high level, or at least a relatively high level on a regular basis, kind of shifts that perspective a little bit in regard to living through our children. Being out there and doing it yourself every day, you understand the commitment, you understand the burden that can come along with that. You also understand the reward, but I think, that changes the perspective a little bit. And what it's helped me to do is focus on the secondary benefits, because you're right. You're never going to be in the environment we're in. You're never going to be the parent who is doing the most. And I think that, to be the best, for the kids to be the best at a particular sport, a lot has to coalesce. You have to have a lot of natural talent there, along with an insane work ethic. And when you're in an environment where, the schools in our area, the high schools have anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 kids. And I tell this story often. If you think about a basketball team at a high school, there's, let's say, 4,000 kids, half men, half women. So you have 2,000 boys, 2,000 girls. Well, out of those 2,000 boys, only 12 of them need to make it through the gauntlet, right? Whether their parents force them at a young age, only 12 of them have to be able to survive whatever that is to make it to that kind of pinnacle, at least for, sub 18-year-olds. So, I think that having that be your primary goal, I want my kid to play high school sports. It's such a long shot for the most part. I happen to have one daughter who's potentially, has the talent to be a high school runner, but I've really tried to focus on the secondary benefits. You guys mentioned them, right? Focus on the consistency, focus on learning how to do hard work. And when you do hard work, it does pay off. So I think that's been a big thing for me, is what are the secondary benefits they're going to get, right? Socializing with kids, learning about camaraderie, learning about teamwork, learning about all these other things. The struggle is to be able to experience those things that you get to experience with a team in our environment at the level that we would like our kids to experience that. There's, and I know I'm digressing a little bit, right? But there's going and practicing a half hour a week. You're not going to see the fruits of your labor. You're not going to see a lot of growth there. And so you want something a little bit more. Unfortunately for us, it goes from 30 minutes to 4.5 hours. And so, that's where I struggle is, my goodness, I'll say it. I have a 6-year-old son who has 5 practices a week, and he's practicing somewhere between 4 and 6, maybe 7 hours. He likes it, but of course there are days where he doesn't want to go. So what we've done is we're flexible with him. Some weeks he doesn't want to go on a Friday night. That's fine. He's 6. But that's kind of where I've struggled. But I would say that my focus has been more on the secondary benefits than having this goal out there or defining myself. Again, going back to my first statement, I don't define myself that way because I try to continue to accomplish and achieve things athletically myself, and I'll let them find their own path.
Yeah, I would say, and it's probably similarly, I've tried to embrace it. What I mean by embrace it is, I think there are some benefits to it. I think naturally the societal view on this is what a travesty. I grew up playing 6 sports, and now these kids have to specialize by whatever age. And I think there's as there is to everything. There are pros and cons, and I've tried to embrace it I think my orientation on life's very purpose driven. I feel like we all have God-given gifts and talents, and I feel like it's our job to nurture those to the best of our ability, not only in ourselves, but in our kids, right? And teach them how to maximize the gifts that God's given them. And so for my oldest, who's 10, who's pretty far down the path, and basketball and golf has been kind of his 2 sports, the idea is, God's given you gifts in these particular sports. How can you prepare and take advantage of those, right, to the best of your ability? And I think TJ talked about so what unique ways do you also take the pressure off, right? And it's not like, well, you have to make the high school golf team or you have to do this. For me, it's just put forth the effort. So in basketball in particular, he is not, I wouldn't say he is athletically gifted in that. So for him, maximizing his talent might look different. So even as you call it specializing, he's focusing on those 2 sports. I think there's a question as to whether or not he'll actually play competitively, even though he is training fairly heavily, right? And I think the focus of that is allowing him and supporting him in that. He trains several hours a week on playing basketball, in a variety of different, plays on a couple of different teams and doing things, but he absolutely loves it. He really enjoys it, and I think he's learning some incredible lessons just about work ethic, and he's seeing the growth in himself, right? And he's seeing himself achieve new levels. He's actually on a school basketball team. He played last year as a fourth grader on a sixth grade team, and this year he's fifth grade. And one of the things the coach does is ask them to go back and watch the film from prior years. And so he's done that, and he has made several comments about how much he has grown and developed in basketball, right? And so for him to be able to see that and then put in the effort and then see effort coming out of that, to me, what a long-term life skill to be able to understand that when you put in the effort and you put in the effort the right way, right, that you can grow in whatever way you want.
You know, it's interesting. You guys both talked about this from different sides. So you had indicated Miles, you know, at 6 years old is 5 nights a week and is probably experiencing a little bit of burnout, you know, and you're talking about Noah and his ability to, you know, want to put all the work in, and he's still finding joy in it. And I know that probably shifts depending on the week, but how do you know, when we grew up, it was just different, right? Like we played a lot of different sports. There was a lot of variety. We did, like, how do you keep a kid interested and keep the love and passion? You know, because when they are talented at it, you can get burnt out, right? It's always like, it's never enough. It's always more. Someone's always out working you. How do you, as parents, approach that?
Yeah, I'll just say two things for me that I think has kept Noah engaged and he's really enjoyed. One is gamification of it at times. And this is, I would say, especially for unstructured training, he's loved to have like certain things that he can work towards and goals and like a structure of doing so many different things a day. I would say that has been, that's been a huge piece. TJ, why don't you go ahead?
No, I think, you know, for me, I think Kaylin's probably the most relevant example, and that's my oldest. And you know, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. And I'd love for you to touch on some stuff because you've had a completely different journey coming from a smaller town. And I know that one of your passions has been, you know, or one of your passions is potentially providing opportunities for kids to play sports. You created a CIFC, which is a soccer club in Central Indiana. And I know there's other things that are on your mind there. But to jump back to the original question, when it comes to Kay, it's, I think, thinking about it. You know, again, I go back to, I said I had a conversation with a buddy and we were talking kind of through this, and he's like, you know, I was talking about my approach versus other approaches that I've seen out there. And he's like, you're putting time into thinking about just doing that, how to keep it fun for them. Right. And so instead of like, so for me, it's like, okay, I'm spending time like, okay, how Kaylin's going to start training for track here in the next week or this week or whatever. How can I make this something that isn't like, oh no, you know, I've got to get out there and I've got to run, whatever. So, you know, her mom is training for a half marathon potentially next year. Run a day with mom. We have a good friend who was a high school cross country coach. His wife was a collegiate athlete. She does track work that is relatively close to what Kaylin can do. Go do track work with Heather on Saturdays. You know, you guys have an individual that works for you, Dakota, that lives very close. Go run with Dakota. You know, run with the Body and Training, which is her track club team, once a week. So all of a sudden she's run 3 or 4 days a week, but it's different. It's fun. It's with different people. It's different efforts. It's different experiences. It's people your age. It's people that are 20 years older than you. But it's putting the time and effort into just being conscious of when they feel like they're burned out. I said earlier with Miles, you know, he unfortunately right now has soccer practices because they're the youngest kids that are Friday night at 5 and Saturday at 8 a.m. Well, I mean, that's really close in proximity. So we're not, you know, when you're practicing that much, I think when we grew up and it was 2 practices a week, like you said earlier, it's commitment. You're going to every practice. You're committed. You said you were going to commit. well, understanding that he's 6 and he's practicing two nights a week for basketball and 3 nights a week for soccer, it's cool. You can miss one. You're 6. You can even miss 2. So I think those are 2 different ways that I've gone about it, is really being dialed into their kind of, I guess, perspective and their feelings and thoughts, and being willing to understand that this is the long game. My middle daughter, Kennedy, I haven't talked much about her. She started in gymnastics, kind of following in her cousin's footsteps, and was really doing very well. But for whatever reason, it started to really give her anxiety. And we pushed through that for maybe 2 practices. And again, then realized this isn't worth it. Luckily, she's found something else that she really likes to do, but just staying dialed in there.
I would just quickly add to that. I think you also have to celebrate the progress. I think that's huge. And that goes back a little bit to the gamification, but a lot of times with my boys, there's been rewards out there that either they can get, or it's just a matter of recognizing and celebrating the progress. I think is huge, because we all like to get better. When you can feel that and you can see that and you see others see that and you can celebrate that, I think that does also.
I think you're right. I think extrinsic is important, and not being afraid to do that. I think people think that that's like a bad thing. If I give my kids a reward for doing whatever, then they're going to expect it all the time. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think eventually, again, like you said, they start to see their progress, and that becomes the driver. But with like a Miles, he has technical training twice a week. That's not fun for somebody that age. Working on ball skills and doing strength and conditioning, that's boring. Well, hey, you do your technical training X number of weeks in a row and you get this. And then eventually, when he's 7 or 8 or 9, if he continues to do this, it's not the end of the world. If he doesn't, he's going to really, I think, relish the fact that he has this skill set that's just light years above a lot of the people he's playing with, and he won't need extrinsic motivation anymore, because he'll understand. He'll be able to make that connection on, as to what he's getting out of being consistent with those efforts.
Sports, I remember sports being fun, right? Like we had a good time. I enjoyed playing sports. I'm sure there were practices that I was like, I just don't want to go, or do I really have to go? But I just remember it being fun. And I feel like, and I go to a lot of different events, and I'm guilty of this as anyone else, but there's just so many parents that are, I think I've sucked the fun out of sports. So we sitting there on the sidelines and they'll miskick a ball and a parent will go nuts. And I've done it before, but it's like, the child's trying to like do the best they can. And like, can you imagine if that was our case, if our dad was on the sideline screaming every time we made a mistake? It's how do you stay in the right mindset for that? Like as a parent or as a coach, and we all want to, because we're competitive, we all want our kids to be successful in sports. I mean, it is about the camaraderie. It is about building relationships. It is about discipline. I think there's a lot of intangibles about sports, but if your kid is maybe not the most gifted and is sitting on the bench, like how do you motivate them? How do you, as a parent, support them and try to encourage them maybe when they're not successful or they're not great at the sport?
I mean, I always talk to my kids in terms of context of again, the gifts they've been given. And I always use a scale of 1 to 10. Like, hey, God gave you 5 out of 10 in soccer. Okay. And your goal is to make the absolute best you possibly can of that. And if you can get that to a 7 from hard work and effort, and like that's where you get to, fantastic. Right. But I would rather see that than God give you a 9 out of 10 and you get to an 8 and you end up at an 8, right? Which technically is better. So for me, I think realistic expectations and framing things for them. So again, trying to take that edge of the pressure off of like, I have to be comparative to others. And there are times to use the competitiveness, right? TJ, you said this yesterday, use what you can, right? At times. But for me, that's a big one.
I think for me, it's interesting because for 2 of my kids, I have this dynamic. They're really good at one sport and not really good at the other sport. And so Miles is an example. He was a really good soccer player, at least at that entry level, and not great at basketball. Doesn't quite have the strength, doesn't quite have the coordination. So 2 things that I've experienced with my oldest and youngest when it comes to basketball is they were that kid who could not get the ball to the rim for an entire season. And so again, it was thinking about, okay, let's focus on defense. Let's focus on what you can do. Let's focus on trying to improve. Kaylin's had this dynamic. She is, at her age, and not everybody's doing it at her age, one of the best runners in the country. On the flip side, she just picked up soccer, and she's playing with girls who, like you said earlier, started when they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And they're two completely different approaches. With cross country, I can use the competitive side of things because she does have confidence in that sport. And there are times when we use that. There are obviously other times when we use the friendship she has there. Go run with your friends, go hang out, take it easy, whatever. But she has gotten to the point where she's got some little targets out there, and she's got that kind of internal self-drive. On the other side of it, it's really like, let's kind of, I listened to somebody say something that after your kid finishes sports, don't jump down their throat right away if it wasn't a great game. Give them time to stew on it, process it, because imagine you come home from work and the first thing your wife does is, if she has context to what you're doing, jump down your throat about your performance at work. Like, give me time to breathe, process, and then let's talk about it a little bit later. So, if things don't go as well, letting them kind of think about it and then kind of having conversations and looking for those bright spots and maybe expounding on those bright spots. Kaylin, you don't have great tactical footwork, but you do have a big engine because of your running. So, let's focus on understanding positioning. Maybe we'll watch some soccer. Maybe we'll do some things that aren't, this heavy load on your brain where we're watching instead of playing, and we're gamifying through things out there like Dribble Up, and you're doing a little bit of that, and we're putting some carrots out there for you to go after. So I think those are, two different dynamics, but that's the way that I keep it a little less intense for them. Focus on going to hang out with their friends, and also the way you phrase it. Hey, let's go play with Miles specifically. Hey, you're going to go get to play games with your friends today. And when we look at it through that lens versus, oh, it's time to go to practice. Well, and I ask him what are the names of some of the kids on your team? In that realm, they have 50 kids spread up a bunch of different teams. So like, there's a little game there. Who'd you play with today? How did you score? Did you stop anybody on defense? Making sure you're focusing on the broader game as a whole. So that I think a lot of times parents get focused on like the pinnacle of whatever sport. How many did you score in basketball today? Well, it's not just that. And so this kid's got the pressure that I have got to score 20 or 25 or whatever. So, I know that's a lot, but that's kind of my perspective on it.
That's actually one of the hardest things it took for me to do. Is the questions you ask are huge. We're just wired to ask how many points you scored or similar type things. To ask the question of, did you try your best? And did you put your best effort, has been a shift for me. It took me a few years to honestly get there. But I think over time, the consistency of the questions you're asking, because kids naturally are the desire to please us, right? And so the questions you ask can 100% be an asset or a liability in terms of how they define themselves and how they define their success. If you're asking them how many points did they score, and after every game, no negative, no yelling, no nothing, and the next game they don't score that many points, they're gonna wear that, right, in some fashion. But why don't you go back and kind of cover some of this kind of in your family, because I feel like you've got a lot of ends of the spectrum covered here, and from those that are very interested in sports or playing or less interested, like what's your...
Yeah, so I have 4 kids. My oldest is 15, and he is into wrestling, recently kind of golf, and soccer. Those have been his sports. My middle daughter, so I have 2 boys on the ends, 15 and 7, and then my daughters are 12 and 11, and so they're 15 months apart. But I would say the interesting thing, as our kids are the older, I think I have the oldest 3, they're all so different, right? And they all have different work ethics, and they're all passionate about different things. My girls tend to not want to do the same things, right? I would say my older daughter, from an athletic standpoint, is higher on the gifted scale, where she is actually loves to put in the work. She is that's probably, she started in gymnastics and was very successful at that at a young age, and then she started kicking a ball around and really developed that, into soccer. Now she's playing travel volleyball, so she really loves sports and she really loves to be out there. But she's also a perfectionist, and maybe something we can talk about at some point is just sometimes kids are really hard on themselves. My younger daughter she's an artist. She sings, she plays piano. She just is very musically talented. So on the God-given, she's just one of those that can hit a note and she's on pitch. And she didn't get that from me, but that's kind of been her story. And then my youngest is just kind of running wild right now. He likes basketball. But I would say for me, just the challenges have been, if I got to be really honest, sometimes I just get this and I know when I get there that I need to shift my mind, but I'm like, I get FOMO, or my kids aren't living up to expectations, and I really want to see them be successful in sports. And so sometimes I get the mentality of they're never doing enough. And I know that probably sends the wrong message, hey, we got to be practicing, we got to be doing this stuff. Or I see them playing video games or on the television, and I'm like, that's a waste of time. So I'm sure other parents probably deal with that as well, but I'd be interested, to hear how you guys approach, a balance in life. I know with my oldest son, it's a huge struggle. He's a big gamer, and he's talented at it, if that's a word, he loves to play. It really is his passion. He looks forward to that. And so as a parent, where I played video games growing up, but I don't see a ton of intrinsic value in that long term. Where's the fruit of that? And I'm always trying to position our kids for success, right? What does success look like? It's, it's being healthy, it's being happy, it's relationships, forming relationships. And so, how do you approach getting your kids a balanced, I want to say a balanced life. I'm not even sure that's the right word, but having that leisure time to let go and what things you allow them to be in. We know there's a lot of science around the addictiveness of certain things. Our personalities are somewhat addictive. I'm afraid to try hardly anything, because if I get addicted to it, if we fired up a new video game right now, we'd be 100 hours in by the end of the week if we had the time, right? We're we're going to take this and we're not only going to beat it, we're going to get every single, armor or weapon or whatever it is. We go to the nth degree. And I know these systems are built around that. So one of the biggest struggles I have is balancing how much time they should be putting in and how much time they should, they come home and sit around and watch TV for 2 hours, knowing when I was younger, we had television, but your show was only on at 1 hour. You couldn't go through and had the mindless scrolling. It was you watched cartoons, or, Jeopardy was on, or whatever that show was. It showed from 5 to 6. And when that was over, there's nothing else to watch. And so you weren't. So I love your guys' opinions on how you even gauge that. Do you even think that's a problem? Is that something that you guys struggle with? How do you gauge productivity versus leisure and navigate that?
Well, I'd like to, it's a good thing. I think one of the things that I'd kind of like to throw back at you very quickly and then expound a little bit more, we were talking again yesterday about we've all explained or stated that we each have a kid who really loves the work. And so for us, I think it's easier where we're at to balance, because there's so many options. You can now this again goes back to the original problem that I spoke of, where there's no middle class, if you will, in sports. You can spend in our area $1,000 a week on personal training for your kid. And so you can really structure that, and you can make it fun, because a lot of those things that they go do are gamified, right? So they're seeing progress, or there's an actual game baked into what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So you have, okay, you're going to do this fun element of your sport, or this element of your sport is gamified. You're going to do this 2 hours a week, and you're going to do this with this business, and then we're going to take this other element of your sport. So one of it is one day it's tactical training, and you're working on this. Then the next day it's strength and conditioning. And so, I think for me, my kids aren't self-motivated, meaning that none of them, during the regular day will go I remember shooting hours and hours and hours out front just on our own. We'd have our friends over, play games, do whatever. None of them do that. If I'm like, hey, you need to work on this, or maybe you should work on this. Why don't you try doing this? Because we all hear it, especially with the way our kids are stimulated today. I'm bored. What do I do? Well, go do this or go do this. Never going to happen. But when you have these structured, gamified organizations out there that your kids can go and engage with. Again, I think you said your son has 3 hours of practice or something on Monday alone, because there's all of these different opportunities. I think you could plug Hadley in or Kaylin in or Noah into any of those situations, and they would love it. They're around friends. They're seeing progress. They're working on specific things. They're able to make the connection because they're 10 and was she 12 or 13, 12? 12, yeah. Yeah, they're 10 and 12. They are able to see the fruits of those labors. So I think we've got it easier. Again, it comes with a price. Yeah. But I know you've got this kind of underlying passion for potentially offering some more opportunities for kids in your area. So I think when I say I'd like to throw it back on you, getting back to that, I know you want to put some of those things forward and give them opportunities to engage in those things. Is that still something that you ultimately want to do?
Yeah, where I live in a small town of about 25,000, there are not those opportunities for the young kids. There are some clubs, but I can't go down to the Pacers facility and take my kids, or having your kids in working on technical skills and drills. There isn't as much opportunity for that in the area. So yeah, I do have a passion of there's no reason because geographical location that we shouldn't be able to offer our kids similar experiences. So that's something that I am passionate about and would love to see kind of take off. And there are several people within the community that feel the same way. It's, there are a lot of very talented people where we're from and gifted athletes that don't have those opportunities. And it is a little bit of a struggle. But on the flip side is if you want to play a sport in high school, you can kind of show up and probably make the team. So there is that ability to, the bar isn't as high and it isn't as competitive. But at the same time, you want your kids, I think ultimately you want your kids playing in a sport or on a team that's competitive, right? Like in soccer, there's, you get your ECNL, which is your top teams, you got your regional teams, and then you got, you've got groups 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can find a group of teams throughout the state that fits your team. And ultimately you want your kids to be in there, compete. Very few kids are going to be ECNL, but the structure that's been developed and the people that are in the bigger cities have put a ton of effort and work into okay, we're going to do skills and drills for 2 days a week. And you're going to this guy, they're doing skills and drills. And when they show up for practice, they're learning strategy. Well, where we're at, we don't have enough kids and we're trying to teach skills and drills and teach people how to, pass, dribble, and shoot instead of teaching strategy. So there are some things with that. We've just kind of launched the building the foundation on the soccer side we had mentioned is this is about skills and drills. It's you have to practice and play. There is both sides of that, and we can make both fun. So the bigger cities have, I think, created great opportunities, the gamification, and the kids can get more engaged, but the competition's that much stronger.
Yeah, I would just hit on what you said, though, which I think is leaning into a strength of your area is they can play high school sports. And when we look at the fruits of playing sports from a life lesson perspective, certainly it's being able to see progress and when you put in effort and grow and develop in things, because you're going to need to do that, in life. But the teamwork, being able to collaborate with others on the team, learn to support each other, how to handle situations where people are performing at different levels and how to navigate that psychologically. So I think that's a nice thing I just wanted to call out is, even in those environments, even though there's not all the technical skills and those sorts of things, I think them being able to compete in a high school environment or a similar environment is important. I think they're getting a lot of the fruits of that. I was going to add one more thing to your question earlier about productivity and balance. I would say I probably err, and this isn't a surprise for anyone who knows me, more on the productivity side. It certainly differs between the week and the weekend, but I would say during the week, 30 to 60 minutes is kind of our unwind time. Sometimes that's screen time. You got 30 minutes of screen time. And other times that's just kind of winding down. Otherwise, we try to be doing something productive. And this may be unpopular. My philosophy is that it's a hard world out there. I'm not a person that feels like happiness is the end all be all. So I'm not one who's like, hey, how do I have, create the environment where my kids just have the happiest childhood and maximize joy. Certainly there's a lot of elements to what we do to celebrate, have fun, enjoy things. But for me, it's also being purpose driven. It's like we were put on this earth to leave it better off than we found it. How do we invest in those gifts and talents and do that? And so I lean into some of that. And I expect the same of the kids. And I feel like that is my hope is, my hypothesis is, we'll see how this plays out, got a long way to go, that will prepare them for what is a difficult world these days. I mean, it's, my middle son was telling me the other day that he was just going to, as long as he had $200 to buy an iPad, that he was good. He didn't need school or grades or job or whatever. That he was really upset that I wasn't letting him play more screen time. But I think kids are extremely resilient and they normalize to things extremely well. And I think sometimes when you create whatever environment you create is going to be the context that basically is set for their lives, right? In the future and their expectations of what that looks like. And the more they have and the more freedom they have and the more flexibility they have and the more they get to do what they want when they're younger, in my opinion, the more challenges a lot of that's going to pose when they get older and they're forced to do a lot of things that they don't want, and they're forced to interact with people that are maybe unpleasant to interact with. They have to handle those situations in different ways. So a little bit of a long-winded answer there, but I would say, for us, I think 30 to 60 minutes during the week, and then the weekend's a whole different ballgame.
Well, the great thing is, I think this is why this conversation is so helpful, is we're kind of the opposite. I think the crazy thing is if you look at natural gifts as a family, the physical and mental skill sets required for video games, it's probably our biggest gift as a family. I remember when we were young kids leaving the house and telling their parents, like, it's on a different level at the Daily House in terms of video game prowess. And so I think, we've always gravitated towards that because our kids see success in those types of things. But when, this is going to spiral a little further away from sports, but, we're a little bit different in the sense that, like, we've let our kids have things a little early. But I think it's with the same idea in mind, right? So I have a 9 and a 10-year-old. They both have phones. Most parents that I know, or a lot of parents that I know, and I think maybe now it's 50-50 when it comes to that age, or maybe 25-75, they wait till middle school or something to that effect. But we see it as a skill set development as well, right? So one of the biggest things we know in the business world is socialization. And again, how, like you said, I think you're approaching it from, I want my kids to be able to handle people or things they don't like. Well, I think, my daughter, one of the things the kids do nowadays, gosh, I sound old. One of the things the kids do is they have these giant group phone calls, 6 or 7 people on FaceTime, and
They
they'll
call all the
call
time.
in and like they'll just sit there on the phone. But when we were young, we had 10 people at the house every night after school. And that was kind of our way to do that. But they're learning in real time because they're so exposed to the nuance and the drama and those things, how to deal with that. And so they're dealing with difficult people now at 10 and they're honing that skill. We do have limits. They're a little bit more liberal. I think my kids have like an hour a day. Miles is one that drives me crazy. I'll wake up at 9 a.m. on the weekend and he's already in front of the TV. But then I think, again, you said it earlier and it was a little different than I remember getting up and watching an hour or two of cartoons. I'll see him on the, on his Nintendo Switch. We weren't allowed to play after a certain point video games during the week, but boy, when the weekend came, like 12, 14 hours of video games. And I think it worked out well, at the end of the day, because you're problem solving. Again, I think the video games to a point are predatory with microtransactions and things like that and kind of playing off the addictiveness of those things. And, I'm seeing, I never understood like some of the I never understood the drive for these kids to get some of these cosmetic things in the video games. No. When we were growing up, if you're putting any more money into a video game, it was directly affecting your ability to perform in said game. But I see it now, right? I started playing Fortnite with my kids. I used to play a lot of first-person shooters, and they want and I'm the default. I don't have the cool skin, so I'm walking around and I'm like, maybe I'd like one. These things are $25 a piece to change the way that you're $20 a piece to change the way your character looks. But again, there's more of that extrinsic motivation. Hey, if you go to, it's kind of balancing itself out, right? You go to tactical training both days for 2 weeks, I'll get you a skin. And so, they're exposed and experiencing both sides of things. They're learning to solve problems in real time. I fortunately, because my kids aren't Roman's age yet, haven't had to deal with extremes. And again, it does go back to the fact that there are so many of these extra things on the sports side that just prevent them. Sports at our house typically starts at 4:30 and typically ends around 7 every day. So there's not even a ton of time to do that. If they got home from school at 3:00 when they do and had nothing until 8:30 when they go to bed, I could see it being way more of a problem than it is.
I think one of the things I wanted to hit on there that you pointed out, which is great, is I think there are different levels and again, leaning into the things that they can learn from these games. I had a conversation with my 8-year-old the other day. We were talking about screens and the iPad in particular, Roblox games, which are very mindless. There's several of them they play that are very mindless, but it's like, just like tap. And they want to leave the iPad on when they're not playing it because it like accrues the things and it like completely starts to fill up all of their cognitive space. That's all they're thinking about. That's all they're doing. Everything else is boring. Obviously you're getting those dopamine hits. I mean, that you want to talk about context, the context for what's boring and not on a dangerous side. My goodness. But the conversation we had was, okay, we had kind of a detox of screen time for a couple of months. And we were going to talk about introducing it back in. And it was, you know what? Let's start with a couple hours a week of Madden. They both love to play Madden, but at least with Madden, you're engaging in the game. Yeah. There's a lot of hand-eye coordination. There's strategy. There's problem solving. So I think there are different levels of games too, and depending on the orientation of your kid and what they're taking to, there are things to learn.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was one thing I was going to talk about. Not all screen time is equal, right? Sure. So the YouTube scrolling, right? Versus my older daughter she's watched every Full House and Fuller House. She'll just get on and love and just like to watch episodes. My youngest daughter watches episodes. So in your guys' mind, you touched on it a little bit, but do you feel like there are certain screen times that build skill sets that are better than others?
Oh, yeah. And I think it's funny.
Rank them for me. Talk to me. What's the worst possible one in your mind and maybe the best possible
I
one?
want to say something quickly. I think it's a microcosm of society as a whole. You're seeing, as technology grows, you see more and more predatory behavior from people. How little can I put into whatever, and I think that aligns directly. How little can I put into whatever it is to make the most money possible? You see on YouTube, there's been a lot of stories about these creators that have kind of figured out the least common denominator formula, and they replicate thousands and thousands of videos that have these, there's 3 or 4 key elements that they know will trigger a kid to engage with them. They're completely mindless. So I would say, that is probably, if you rank them, I would say that anything that is short form for the most part. I mean, again, when you're letting your kids do certain things, you try to justify it, right? Like, what are they getting out of this? My kids are not allowed to have TikTok. They don't have Snapchat, but they do have YouTube Shorts. And so I would say that if I want to rank, probably the least beneficial is YouTube Shorts. We have other little rules around there because I do want them, you talked about a difficult world. I do want them to understand that this stuff isn't real. Like one thing my kids are not allowed to watch are those family shows on YouTube, like the such and such family and the such, like that's not real. People, it's like what we see as adults on Instagram. That's not somebody's real life. They're not always that happy. I was talking to a buddy a couple months ago on a run, and he was like, it was the craziest thing. We were at a holiday party or a 4th of July. It was in the summer. We were at a 4th of July party, and this family, they were just at each other's throats the whole time. And then the mom gathered the kids up to take this photo, and it looked so pristine and whatever. And the second the photo was done, they were at each other's throats. So their life is not representative at all versus what you're seeing. So I think with the YouTube Shorts, there's a lot of that's misrepresenting what reality is. And I've even seen, especially with the young ones at times, where they have this complete misconception of what's real because it's been painted as something real on YouTube. So I'd say that's the worst. Then regular YouTube in general, for the most part, because at that age, there's no ability to discern what is good from what's not. I think, again, justifying my own behavior because I consume a lot of content, I like to tell myself that there's a purpose to a lot of it and that I'm educating myself in certain realms. I think it'll come in handy in a format like this because I see a lot. But, I think YouTube would be the second. And then there are different types of video games. I really think, though, the direct correlation is, and I won't finish ranking them because I think this kind of does it for me. If you look at the effort that the developer or the producer or the director or whatever put into creating whatever it is, I think that aligns directly with the value that is delivered to, hey, you're not going to sit here and watch YouTube all day. Well, I'll let you watch a movie because you're going to learn lessons there. You're going to identify with characters. You're going to see, so I think for me, that's how I would rank them, is just based on that.
We've had very little. I think for me, the way I would look at it a little bit is me understanding enough about what they're consuming to be able to set a context and fill gaps where they don't have it. Because you made a great point that they're not able to. And so that's why YouTube's pretty much off limits unless we're sitting there watching it with them. And generally that's very rare, or it's some unique thing that we're watching. Because I think that's the most dangerous thing, is them consuming content and us not knowing what it is and not being able to provide those clarifications and those realities because they don't have the context to digest it. So to me, I would look at it that way. That's the worst, whether it's a YouTube short or a longer YouTube or anything else that they might be seeing, even on TV. That's kind of, for me, on the best side, I think something that develops problem-solving skills, hand-eye coordination. I mean, hand-eye coordination is becoming more and more important. It's becoming a more and more digital world, right? I think a lot of times we like to say, we went out, we played baseball, whatever. Like, we also have to realize it is becoming a more and more digital world, and some of that hand-eye coordination and that familiarity with technology is going to come in handy, maybe much more than it even has in our, because we're just going to continue to go down that path. So yeah, that's what I would add.
It's interesting you say that. I think about one of the things that I'm starting to think about with my oldest is like, what jobs are going to be available, in the next 20, 30 years? And you think about we're flying drones now versus planes, and you think about some of that stuff. And you guys have made some really good points that I've kind of realized. Like, I know your youngest plays Fortnite and like that hand-eye coordination. My youngest is 7 years old, and he has beat all the Zeldas, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, right? And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that from a thought standpoint. So what I'm kind of hearing is more of the maybe games or movies or screens, when they are allowed, it's still tempered, that, where they can develop some of those skill sets would be a better place to.
Yeah, the other thing I would add, and I'm going to add this because I'm horrible at this, I think screens or movies, you said in particular, that's what triggered this for me. I think there's some movies that are well done, and time that's invested in those can also be mentally valuable. I guess clearing of, for me, a lot of times I have trouble sitting down to watch an entire movie because it's like I'm wasting time. Like I could be doing something productive right now, professionally, or listening to some self-development something. But there's also like you've got to unwind, I guess is maybe the word. And there's, just clearing your head mentally, sometimes engaging in a movie like that and letting it have your entire focus. There are some things to take, but just in general, kind of your body kind of, I don't know exactly what word I'm looking for, but just kind of recharging and kind of, to me, is something that I think some of these screens and certain movies in particular, I think has to offer, in addition to always developing some sort of skill or whatever. I think one of the things that that just kind of triggered, and I would get into, because I think I do, one of the things I've gotten into, I think is unique, is providing life coaches for my kids. I think a lot of what we do and going forward, I still don't understand why everyone doesn't have a mental coach. We all have physicians, right? Or doctors, supposed to go to the doctor once a year or more often, depending on what we're going through. To me, as I have experienced different levels of success in this world, I would say every bit of half, if not more, is dependent on my psychological state than it is kind of my physical skills. So much is mindset anymore, yet we have no overarching guidance from a psychological perspective. There's no institutional, and I understand why, because it's more subjective, it's difficult to understand. But we have, in particular, invested in what I would call life coaches, and I think the terminology is important. I think therapist, in my opinion, while people are doing a great job reducing the stigma of that, therapist has kind of a connotation that something's wrong. Well, I don't know that things are necessarily wrong. They can be more or less wrong, but I think just in living in this world, our brains, just like our bodies, are just all over the place. We go through different phases and different times, and to not have anyone who has the institutional knowledge to help us navigate that and talk through that, I think is it's a little bit of a travesty, honestly, in my mind. And so we have tried to invest in, and so this just going back, what triggered with the movies and things, kind of helping from a mental balance standpoint, is trying to give them the tools and the resources to be able to take on this world mentally and not just physically.
That I imagine if some of the listeners are going to be really intrigued by that, do you mind sharing? You don't have to say who you guys use, but kind of sharing that process and what you've seen from that.
Yeah, I Googled kids life coaches, I think was what I Googled, and I did some research and reviews on my own, and we've engaged with a few different coaches. Some worked better than others, and we've narrowed in on one that supports both of our boys. But I will say it's interesting. She supports us as well. Like she helps unpack us and helps us deal with some situations. We were talking to her the other day about one of our kids, and she was helping us kind of understand maybe what they're going through and what they're seeing, and kind of coaching us on how to handle these situations. So it's been I would say extremely valuable. Like anything with kids, I think things stay fresh. So we've kind of gotten into a cadence of every quarter we'll kind of have a little bit of a refresh, or if there are some particular challenges, kids, just like adults, go through phases. We go through challenging times, those sorts of things. During that, we'll re-engage to the point where one of my kids had has been going through feeling some more anxiety and stress with things in sports and school, and actually expressed interest. Like, hey, I'd like to like meet with the coach. And so to me, that was exciting to see there was actually interest in it because they see the benefit. But really what they do in those sessions, and they give summaries and things to us in terms of what they're going through, but they're just teaching them basic things. Now, what I will say is a year removed from those sessions, those skills are dormant, right? You've got to continue to make sure that they're leveraging those skills. And sometimes they need refreshers to remember how to deploy some of those skills to deal with the stressors or whatever. But we have seen it to be at least very valuable to this point.
I want to this is going to be interesting because this is, again, not even really devil's advocate, but, because you mentioned listeners, and ability to do that. I think there's a lot of people out there, myself included, and I think all of us to a point, we all know that there's different levels of success and different levels of, or different placements in society. And, no matter who you are, you've got to make a conscious decision on how to live your life, where to spend your money, and so one of the things that I've grown appreciative of, and I'll get to where I want to get to, but this is going to be a little bit of a roundabout way, is specification. So people that spend time just thinking about one thing. We all have those strengths. Some of us are more jacks of all trades than others, but going kind of back to the therapist side of things, I've been talking to a guy recently, again, just on runs, who is a very successful coach in that kind of same space, not professionally trained at all, but he spends all day thinking about these different angles, different approaches, different ideas, different ideals, how to implement things, how to boil things down. He's looked at those things and attached them to the spiritual side and the religious side of the world, and how to implement some of the learnings and teachings from scripture out there in life and whatever. So, I want to, the reason I go that route, and the reason I say that is because where you are way more productive than we are. For me, I'll speak to myself, way more productive than I am. You seemingly, from an outside looking in, are constantly always doing something to improve, and so you're as busy as they come. And so I think because of that, having the life coach, because of that, you've been able to generate a certain lifestyle for yourself. And because of that, it's like this double-edged sword, right? You're busy enough that you don't have time to sit around and think about how can I better my kids from a mental perspective. But because of the hard work you put into day-to-day life and what you've generated from an income perspective, you can reach out to somebody else to help you do that with your kids. I would want to encourage people out there and I know there are those of you who are probably split at the seams, right? You're working a job, your wife's working a job, you don't have the income to afford someone to help mentally coach your kid or yourselves. I think that, spending a little bit of time here and a little bit of time there, like we talked about earlier, and thinking about things the best you can, just being cognizant. I think that's one of the biggest things, cognizant and or conscious of the fact that you've got to focus on that element and that part of yourself and of your children. We've seen I don't know what you want to call it, obviously over the last 70 years, call it from the, I'm sure way further back than that, we've seen kind of the shift in focus on the importance of mental health because, you have people who for decades and decades and decades kept it bottled up inside and lived miserable lives and had a lot of regrets because they never did address that type of thing. So I just wanted to kind of call that out because I'm sure there are people out there like, gosh, I don't have the money to invest in this particular thing, but just being conscious of it in and of itself is, I think, really important. And, if you can spend some time to think about how to help them deal with those things, even if it's going in, and a routine we have is every kid gets like 15 to 20 minutes every night. We kind of sit down and we talk through things. We spend that extra time, if you have it, to kind of understand their perspective. And I think that's important.
To me, I would say that's the most important. In fact, in some of our coaching sessions, that's one of the things they say is, and you hear this more broadly, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And that applies to the kids too. And if you don't have an underlying relationship and a connection there, it's very difficult for you to be able to provide guidance. And I think sometimes, I think to your point, that is the intentionalness from a parental perspective, to have awareness, to be cognizant of it, and to support from a psychological perspective as well, I think is absolutely the most important part of it.
You guys both kind of touched on this, but it's like productivity, which we're wired for, versus leisure. And I think there's a balance of that in us. And they said, I love the saying, it's like, who's your favorite kid? And they're like, the one that's most like you, right? Like, it's easy to relate. But as parents, it's tough enough to judge productivity and leisure on our own levels. Like, all three of us I'm probably the blend. You're probably more leisure and you're more productive, and I'm kind of sitting in the middle. But that for our kids, it's really tough to balance that.
Yeah, it is. We've kind of gone with a love hard, discipline hard kind of mindset. I think the relationships, however you approach it, the relationships have to be there.
Yeah.
The quarterly trips that I take with the boys, and sometimes it's just nothing extravagant, but it's like we'll go downstairs and we'll have a Madden night, or we'll go wherever and just spend time together. It's challenging. It's just challenging in today's environment to find the time and navigate and keep it all balanced.
Well, we've really come full circle. We started kind of with sports. We've kind of gone through the gamut of maybe some of the challenges we've had with raising our kids, and with what the environment that they live in is different than the one that we live in. If I feel like you guys have done a pretty good job with removing your identity from the success of your kids in sports, and maybe that's the environment you're in and the competitiveness, and just realizing that being the best is unlikely genetically. With 4,000 kids at a high school, not impossible. Any advice you want to give around that?
I mean, I just think, fortunately for us, I think one of the things is you can be comfortable that you're checking the box. That's one of the things that always is whenever we are preparing for anything, I for one like to over-index in preparedness. So feel like I've done all I can do. And I think with everything that's offered down here and or where we're at, that for the most part, I'm checking all the boxes I can, because then you, and that gives me kind of peace of mind that, for me to do any more and to put them in any better position, I'm going to have to look at like really what are our values as a family. Like, hey, all right, well, do you want to be a family that takes vacations? Okay, well, not if we're going to take it to this level in sports. Or do you want extravagant gifts or gifts in general at birthdays? Do you want big birthday parties? Well, not if we're going to take it to this level in sports. So, I think where our values are lying as a family today is great. It works for us. And given those guardrails, I'm able to feel comfortable that we're doing as much as we can for them, putting them in the best position possible. Again, spending time thinking about it is, and I think we're seeing the fruits of those labor, and fruits of that labor. And I'm confident that those secondary benefits we talked about, which I think are the most important at the end of the day, all the things they're learning outside of being really good or really proficient at a specific activity, is all of the benefits they're getting on the side. I think, that's a big thing. Now, I can't say that. I think we all get wrapped up in particular performances at times, and like I had it last week. My daughter, again, who I said is kind of more she's learning soccer. They're playing in an indoor league, a 5-on-5 indoor league, and they played against a team who had 4 girls. They had 5, and they got beat 18-1. And it was one of those, and again, the other team was a person down, and it was one of those things where you go to a game, and I think the way I articulated it at the time is, you said something earlier about the different tiers of soccer, and you just want them to be in a competitive environment. If they're not winning the war, at least they're winning battles here and there. They might get beat 5-0, but they're winning these little battles throughout the match. And then there are games like what happened to my daughter last week, where they just got throttled, had no business playing that team. There wasn't anything that came out of it. And so I was furious. And that was a fault in myself. I left dejected, and I was projecting my feeling. And, I let her calm down for a little bit, but then I made the comment like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to lay down and take it, or are you going to use that anger and drive you forward and get better and get better? We ended up talking through that, later on down the line, is actually after her last game this last week. And I explained that I was kind of in the wrong for, and there are times in life where you need to learn how to take that, whatever emotion it is, and translate that into productivity or into success. But yeah, I mean, for me, those are some of the different things that I do to kind of keep my personal, and again, I'll mention it, and I've mentioned it 4 times, getting out and being active yourself, and having that validation through doing your own thing. I think, and I see it, man. There's a particular cross country. This is whatever. It's our podcast. I'll be judgmental. There's this girl who runs for a team in a different part of the state who's pretty good, and her mother's there and is just, she has a reputation. And over 3 years, everyone knows who she is because she's so loud, so aggressive, so into it, so over the top. And again, I'm judging a book by its cover, but it looks like that this is her thing. She's living through her daughter. It doesn't look like there's been a fitness journey. Again, maybe there has, but it seems that this is all she has. And if this doesn't work out, it's the end of everything.
I think that's a trap that a lot of parents fall into. You want, whether you had success in sports in high school or you want your kids to live up to that. I'd love to throw one more dynamic into this. We've talked about the physical, we've talked about the mental, but we haven't really talked about the spiritual side of things. And one of the things that I've realized a few years ago is the number one thing I can try to help instill in my kid is kind of confidence and self-worth. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear how you guys, from a spiritual standpoint, how you incorporate that or use that with your kids, if at all. Maybe you don't, but I'm curious to see how that integrates into this process of raising kids and teaching them lessons and helping them prepare, because there's the spiritual component is arguably one of the most.
Surprise, surprise. As you alluded to earlier, mine is more casual. Out of the 3 of us, my religious journey has probably had the most bumps in the road. But a couple of years ago, when Kay started running, it was with a track club cross-country team, Body and Training, and it is a Christian-based, faith-based organization. And they are very true to that word. This isn't we're Christian, we're faith-based, whatever. Every single week, there are devotions, and the kids are being taught about and having discussions with their smaller groups about particular scripture and verses and how those are applicable to life, as well as whatever sport they're participating in. A lot of the kids who've been in this program for a really long time, they have already made those connections, and they have this vast library of scripture that they have aligned with different elements within their sport. And most of them, and you hear this, and I love this because it's something that I've seen now executed. So often in professional sports, the first thing somebody says when they come up to a podium is glory to God. And I think that unless you've really seen people utilize that pathway for their own success, right? I'm suffering for the glory. you call into question, are they just getting up there and saying that because that's the right thing to say when you walk up to a podium? So seeing some of these older kids implement things like, hey, coach, can you pray for me while I'm running? Or I'm praying for other people while I'm running, because that takes the focus off myself and the pain that I'm feeling with inside, and it allows me to project that on other people. Or, I'm using the gift he's given me. We always use the Prefontaine quote, to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And you mentioned that earlier. So running for the glory of God, trying your best to glorify the fact that he's giving you this skill set, is, I think, the most important thing you can do. So that's how we've worked it in. It's not very structured, but through exposure and experience has been something that has been very important, especially for her in specific.
Yeah, I mean, I won't just repeat a lot of that, but I would say very similar in terms of honoring God with the skills and gifts, talents you've been given. What I think is unique about this whole parenting thing, and what I think is frustrating and beautiful about it at the same time, is there's no right answer. I think the right answer is different for every family, as you've heard, even growing up together and having a similar set of values instilled in us. We all still have different orientations. And I think they can all be right answers because it's for us and for our family and how we're each wired and how we interact with our families. And I think my thought process on this, and what I continue to spend a lot of time on and stay close to, is what's important at the end of the day. Right. So I think sometimes we all naturally get caught up in the moment. And I think what I try and continue to do is have as big a picture mindset as I can, as frustrated as I might be with how one of the kids played in a sporting event. When I step back and understand kind of the grand scheme of things and can step out of that moment, that's super helpful for me. And I think what goes along part with that is, what do you want for your kids? Like understanding that. I mean, I've heard you've got your Tiger Woods of the world, where I think Eldrick Woods, his dad wanted him to be the best golfer in the world and inspire people in that regard, right? And there were a lot of what I think society would call dysfunctional things that happened in that family in order for him to get to that point. But that's what he wanted for his kid. And certainly someone could argue that has been Tiger has been inspirational for a lot of people in the world from a golf perspective. And now, was that worth the sacrifices? And you get into a subjective question there. I've got others that I've talked to that said, I just want my kid to grow up and be a very emotionally well-rounded, supportive person who can successfully interact and support others in society, right? Just really emotionally intelligent and has a high quality of life. I always love the Tony Robbins quote, quality of life is not what you have, but how you feel. And so that's what they want for their kids, and they're going to parent accordingly. And so I think it's understanding, how you are oriented, what you want for your kids, and working with them to understand what they want, and then supporting them in that fashion. And so I think if you have your eye on that prize and on that outcome, most of our kids aren't going to play sports professionally. So playing sports isn't about necessarily the level of success that they're going to achieve, because they're very most likely not going to make a living doing it. So what are those values and things that you're trying to instill? How do you maintain that confidence? And I think the spiritual layer, to close back with that, is an incredible foundation to build upon. And that's where I think it's important, from knowing you're a beloved child of God, from a confidence perspective, that you're uniquely gifted with certain talents and things to deploy. I think those are all extremely valuable foundations to set that can then be built upon.
I like one more thing on the back of that. You made it just triggered something. You made a comment about having specific skill sets. And I think that's something that's so cool that is learned in sport, is that, if you're on a team, a soccer team, and you have X number of people on the field, or a football team, everybody has these specific skill sets, and you learn to appreciate those. You learn to understand what you're good at and you're not good at, and it helps you, I think, find your place in society and be creative with the skills that you have to end up doing what you want, versus people that don't experience that don't know how to. I think that's where you see, and you guys see it a lot, and we can talk about this in another episode, where you see struggle and strife in the workplace because it's me. It's what what can I get for me? And this person is encroaching on my thing, versus like sitting down and I've even had this feeling inside lately, some stuff that's happened in my organization, but I know at the end of the day, it's okay, let's sit down and figure out how we can best deploy each other's skill sets or other skill sets within our organization to appreciate what they've spent their career building. And if there's some overlap, we'll figure it out. I think sports really teaches you to appreciate those other approaches of different people and what they're good at. And, really find joy in the success of other people, where in a lot of other instances today, we don't see that because it's joy. We believe it's joy or it's achievement at an impact or detriment to us.
I want to kind of ask you the question you asked us. I mean, spiritually, I think you've probably been as active as any of us, probably the most active in living that out and embodying that or embedding that into your family in certain ways. What just triggered as you were talking about this, we're all talking about how to be successful in the world, right? In the world, in the world, in the world. And one could argue, if you have any sort of, whatever your religious orientation, if you have one, let's just use Christianity, for example, the goal is to get to heaven, right? And so that really frames all of this of like, certainly we want our children to be able to be successful in this world, but at the end of the day, again, depending on your spiritual orientation, to get to heaven, like talk about that.
Yeah, so one of the things I always talk about is kingdom greatness versus worldly greatness. Part of my journey in life is worldly greatness, and worldly success is what kind of drove me as a person until I realized that wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And I think what, again, spirituality in general, and for us Christianity, is what I say, I don't believe, I think churches are important. I think that having a support and a group is important, but one of the most important things is like, how did Christ live his life? And that's what I try to go back to. And if you read the Bible, Christ lived his life to basically serve other people. And I think the lessons that come out of that, when you're spiritually dialed in, you're generally not focusing on yourself. We spend so much time on self-focus. And really when we're focusing on ourself internally, that's when we have the most strife, right? Like, oh, this didn't work out, or oh, why is this happening to me? When I find myself thinking about myself, that's when I go through the slew of emotions, good or bad, right? And so one of the things that I've learned through my journey through Christianity and the Bible is like, Jesus, whether you believe in him or not, you could argue he's a pretty phenomenal dude because the way he lived his life, he gave his life for everybody, he served people. And so the lessons that I'm trying to embody to my kids are living a life of humility, right? You talk about being on a team, appreciating others' gifts. Like if we're not self-focused and we're reading stories and we're talking things about what did this person do and what's their gift, and like my really competitive daughter who's a really good soccer player is now for the first time trying travel volleyball, and she is not in the full rotation. And she's having a hard time coping with, why am I having to sit out? One of two girls that has to rotate. And the truth is, it's great for her, but it's like, okay, what role am I playing and how am I living into that role? And how can we shift our mindset? And so when you bring spirituality into the whole mix, it's like focusing on other people, lifting other people up, giving my best, like all those lessons of how Jesus lived his life, I think are great lessons for us and for kids. Because one thing that I've realized as well is like, and you talked about this in the last episode, it's like seeing other people be successful is like one of the greatest emotions there is in life. It's like seeing other people achieve and lifting other people up. And yeah, we want to be successful too, but there's when you're in the role of a coach, and you're helping other people. And even my other daughter, who's also playing travel volleyball, I said, I want you to go out this last game and I want you to be the hype girl. I want you to bring all the energy, and I want you to do the dances and the claps when they do the ace. And I bribed her, as most parents would, and she did it and she loved it. She had more energy in that. So whether your daughter or son is the hype person and they can just bring energy to a situation, or they can lift others up, like that's just as much as important as I think anything else. And that's where I think, having a spiritual belief and believing in something greater than you and focusing on yourself is super important.
Well, I know you close this out, but I think that's the perfect place to end this. And I think there's a lot we're talking about that I'd love to explore on the business side in a future episode, but continue.
Okay, well, that's a wrap. Thank you guys for, again, I hope everyone is getting some value here, and look forward to episode 3.